If you open your Bibles to 1 Timothy chapter 5. 1 Timothy chapter 5. Rebuke not an elder, but entreat him as a father, and the younger men as brethren, the elder women as mothers, the younger as sisters with all purity. Honour widows that are widows indeed. But if any widow have children or nephews, let them learn first to show piety at home, and to requite their parents, for that is good and acceptable before God. Now she that is a widow indeed and desolate trusteth in God, and continueth in supplications and prayers night and day. But she that liveth in pleasure is dead while she lives. And these things given in charge, that they may be blameless. But if any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith, and is worse than an infidel. Let not a widow be taken into the number under 80 years old, having been the wife of one man, well reported of for good works. If she had brought up children, if she had lodged strangers, if she had washed the saints' feet, if she had relieved the afflicted, if she had diligently followed every good work. But the younger widow refused, for when they have begun to wax wanton against Christ, they will marry, having damnation before, because they have cast off their first faith. And withal they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but tattlers also about, and busybodies, speaking things which they ought not. I will therefore that the younger women marry, bear children, guide the house, give none occasion to the adversary to speak reproachfully. For some are already turned aside after Satan. If any man or woman that believeth hath widows, let them relieve them, and let not the church be charged, that it may relieve them that are widows indeed. Let the elders that rule well be counted worthy of double honour, especially they who labour in the word and doctrine. For the scripture saith, Thou shalt not muzzle the ox that treadeth out the corn, and the labourer is worthy of his reward. Against an elder receive not an accusation, but before 2 or 3 witnesses. Them that sin rebuke before all, that others also may fear. I charge therefore before God and the Lord Jesus Christ, and the elect angels, that thou observe these things without preferring one before another, doing nothing by partiality. Lay hands suddenly on no man, neither be partaker of other men's sins, keep thyself pure. Drink no longer water, but use a little wine for the stomach's sake, and thine often infirmities. Some men's sins are open beforehand, going before to judgment, and some men they follow after. Likewise, also the good works of some are manifest beforehand, and they that are otherwise cannot be hid. And may the Lord bless this reading of his most precious word. There's actually, as I said before, a great deal in that. I mean, the end of it, as we heard, talks about, or it sounds like Timothy may not have actually been the healthiest of people. And it talks about take a little wine because the water was not safe to drink in those days. You know? So in my Bible, it's titled Pastoral Duties, and it deals with the interaction between Timothy as a pastor and the 4 groups of people, as I said earlier. So I'm going to divide this sermon up likewise. So firstly, we're going to set the bar. We're going to set where this part of this letter resides. It's believed that 1 Timothy was written somewhere between 62 and 66 AD. That matters because a lot of this letter to Timothy is impacted by the Council of Jerusalem. But it also places Timothy at a certain age. We always say it's Paul's letter to the young pastor, Timothy. Except at this point, Timothy is not so young. He's between 45 and 50 years of age, we believe. So it's young in being a pastor of a church, of running a church, but not young in physical age. And assuming that when we talk of elders, we're not talking of elders in a church such as the pastor, the deacons, we're talking of older men or older women. And when we talk of younger men, we're talking of men younger than or up to the same age as Timothy. And the first group of elders, the first group we're going to talk about is elder men older than Timothy. The second group is younger men. Then we have elder women and mothers and widows. And widows is an important one because you've got to remember life was harsh and short in those days. So to have widows wouldn't be uncommon. And finally, dealing with younger women as sisters. And we may touch on other matters as we go through this. Family matters. From verse 3 through to 16, Paul seems to be concentrating on this group he calls widows. In verse 3, he suggests that some widows are not truly widows at all. Now, a widow in our age is just somebody whose husband has died. But Paul takes a slightly different view, and I don't know whether that different view was common during his era. I do not believe for 1 minute that it doubts that the lady's husband had died. But being a widow has nothing to do with that. It's about how the lady, in this case, it's about how the lady behaves. Paul strongly, in these verses, has a very specific sense of how widows should act. In the days of the New Testament, when this was written, there was no social security, there was no social assistance as such. There was no system where if you were poor or if you had nothing, you could actually go and get aid off the state. Yes, it's true that in Rome itself there was a daily ration of bread for the citizens of Rome, but outside of that, I don't know. There was support at some level from the temple and from the Jewish communities, but at this stage, this is a Christian church. And you would think, wouldn't you, because that's what we would do nowadays, that these widows would be able to get assistance off the church. But Paul's going, no, that needs to be limited. And it's limited for a really good reason. Because the church, like every other body, has a limited amount of funds. So what he does says, and he goes here, elderly widows who usually had support from their husbands or grown children, and without means to adequately support themselves, those who are rarely widows. So what you're talking about here is an elderly lady, probably not able to work, and she's got no family whatsoever. She's got no children, she's got no nephews, no nieces, no brothers-in-law, nobody. They are truly widows because they've got no one. And then there's other widows who have children, grandchildren, sisters, brothers. They're not a true widow in this particular context. And it would be interesting, I suppose, to one day to actually look at how the word widow is understood in general anyway. We know that there are people out there who will try to take advantage of the church. We have here had first-hand experience of that, Barry and I, with the young man that came here that needed help. And he kept trying to get Barry and I to sign the church up to sponsoring his mother to come across from Iran. And when we looked at what that actually meant, it meant we would have been financially responsible for it. We don't have that type of resource. A true widow, then, is one without family. And she's left with no option but to turn to the church. And those who are true widows, it says, we are to receive with honour. So we are meant to do what we can. In this particular context, it means financial support, given in a dignified, honourable way. So you wouldn't make a big event about giving financial aid. It would be sort of like, here's a tenner in the back pocket type stuff, you know. Give it in a way that doesn't embarrass the widow. But there is a very strong sense here that when a widow wants support, the very first people she should go to is her family, her extended family. And it is the duty of families to support families, be that her children, or her grandchildren, or her niece, or her nephews, or her brothers-in-law, or her sisters-in-law. However wide you want to do that, while she's got family that she can call on, they should be the first target. Think of the family in the widest sense possible. And I do wonder if in this particular sense Paul had the commandment to honour thy father and thy mother in mind when this was being written. I do find also that in verses 4 to 6, those who should legitimately be helped by the church must live godly lives. So it's not actually saying anybody who turns up at church. No, somebody that just walks in off the street. It doesn't say the church should help them either. It says they must live godly lives. So there must be somebody who prays. And in fact, the reading points to that when it says a woman who prays and gives thanks to God. So even Paul is saying to Timothy, don't squander your resources on people that don't deserve it. It doesn't say to hoard them either, but it says to be considerate. Think about it. Work out who is a proper widow that can't be supported. And for that word widow, you could actually put any person in that box. Somebody who hasn't got a family to support them. And then how are they living? Because if they're not living a godly life, it is appropriate to tell to them, you're not living a godly life. So you won't receive financial assistance from the church. There seems to be a view nowadays that the church should just hand over money to anybody and everybody that wants it. But no, Paul doesn't say that at all. It says if you're going to indulge somebody, or if you're going to support, it simply means that one who indulges herself in good eating and good drinking and pampering her body at the expense of her mind, no, they don't get support. Somebody that lives a wild life, basically, they don't get support from the church. The church will support in basics, but not overindulgences. The life that is led for mere pleasure and ease is no life at all. In fact, it's a living death for the church, because it means you're living in sin, whether it's lived by a young widow or anybody else. Many who come to the church for assistance are in need because they have lived such lives of pleasure. They've squandered their money. If you think of the story of the young lad that took all his inheritance from his father and went and squandered it in riotous living, as the Bible puts it. Loose women. And end out feeding the pigs until he goes home to his father. And his father accepted him. Now, that's not the same issue as this here, because that's somebody who the church knew. If you were to say somebody from the church, so say for example, George went out and did riotous living and then came back, we would welcome George with open arms and help him get back onto where he needs to be. But if somebody just walks in, and we know what they live like, if somebody just walks in and does not live a godly life, then we actually have to get them onto that path first before we actually give them any financial aid or any aid whatsoever. It's not demanded of us that we support people who live in a way that God would not want. If you're going to live a life of pleasure, then the consequences of living a life of pleasure are all yours. It's not the church's responsibility. The resources of any congregation are to help the poor, the needy, those that really have no one, those that are really on their uppers, those that really need and show a contrite heart and a turning to God. Verses 7 and 8 give a strong warning about people who do not provide for their own families. God's normal way of providing for the needy is not through a local congregation, but through our own hard work. He has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever, Paul writes. In the strongest terms possible, Paul emphasized the responsibility of men, if you're married, to provide for his family, to do what he can to support them. This is the minimum required of a Christian man. If he does not even do this, his conduct is worse than an unbeliever's. That is why when somebody is out of work, we can pray with such confidence, knowing it is for them, knowing that it is God's will for them to be able to provide for their family. And I found this personally an interesting read, because it brought to me a discipline that was placed to me by my father and his father. My dad and my mum gave little pocket money. There were 5 of us. My dad was a policeman on a £5 a week at the time. It wasn't much in the 60s. And with 5 kids, we all wanted a little bit of that, but he had a mortgage to pay, he had a family to support, and all of that type of stuff. If we wanted extra, we had to go out and earn it. We had to go and get jobs. And since the age of 12, I've worked. I've done the paperboy bit, morning and night. I've done the old co-op cycle with the big basket on the front. And the nice people that used to throw sticks through it so I'd go flying off, I've done all of that. And then I left school and went straight into full-time work. I didn't have an option for university. A, I wasn't bright enough. But B, it was a case of going, my mum needed the money. We went out and we got work. And like everybody else in this part of Liverpool, National Gyro Bank. In the south end of the city, you had the big Ford factory. On this side, we had National Gyro Bank. And we worked. And even when I was first married, and I was made redundant the week after I got married, I walked the streets looking for work. I walked from Garston right through the city centre, right through Speke, up to Crosby, visiting I knew the location of every job centre. Because I stopped in all of them, even the private ones, looking for work. Because that's how I was brought up, to work to pay my wife's bills. It's called the Protestant work ethic. And eventually, I found work. And I took it. I wasn't fussy. I was earning, therefore, any job I could get, I took. And some of them worked, and some of them didn't. And as time went on, I eventually settled into normal or full-time work and got a career. But it took a lot of hard graft to get to where I am, and lots of knockbacks. Verses 9 and 10 talking about true widows over 60 years of age. So, 60 years of age and of good report. And just to clarify something, brought up children. It doesn't mean that she had children. Doesn't mean that she had children at all in general. Maybe she's helped with other people's children. Maybe she's actually helped with orphans. Maybe she's cared for other people's children when needed. It's got to be very, very carefully thought out when you hear that word, brought up children. But if in Paul's day, orphans would have been common. It wouldn't have been unusual for the parents to be dragged off and to be martyred, and the children left behind. It wouldn't have been unusual for diseases to come, things that we are so common, and even measles and stuff could appear, and they would be deadly to families, and the kids survive. Somebody's got to bring the kids up. And in the church, those kids would be put with the widows. If the widow is under 60, then it's assumed she can still support herself. It sounds harsh, but in a sense a line has to be drawn somewhere. And under 60, it is assumed that in those days, and even today, she can still be married. I would argue that the rule here is this: those who can work should do. They should do the best they can to support themselves. Once you get to an age that you cannot get work, then yes, you get help. But your first port of call should be your family, and only at need should it be the church. And that seems to be what Paul is getting at here. Does this mean the church is unchristian or harsh? No, it doesn't. I think it's more a case of the church has a finite resource, and therefore it needs to be well managed, so that the maximum number of people can be helped with a minimal resource. Verses 17 to 21, talking about the church leaders, elders in a sense, and this is elders as in people like me and Barry. In summary, pay the man what he's worth, he says, looking at the treasurer. Pay the man what he's worth, especially if a teaching elder. If anybody wants to accuse an elder, and this does happen, there's a great story, I'll tell you. It needs to be done by 3 separate witnesses. So there's an old story about a pastor. And this pastor is trying to defend himself against criticism. And he said, there's a story going on around about me that I told my wife not to go to a certain church that has wild meetings. They say my wife went anyway, and I dragged her out of the church by her hair. And I hurt her so badly she had to go to hospital. Let me respond to these accusations. First of all, I never told her to stay away from that church. Secondly, I didn't drag her out by her hair. Thirdly, she never had to go to the hospital. And lastly, I've never been married. So I don't have a wife to do that too. Verse 22 talks about people aiming for ministry. In essence, it says, take your time. This is to Timothy. People want to be part of the ministry. Take your time. Don't rush to indulge them. Sit back, watch, wait. Make sure they are proper people. It's easy to go and be tied up with somebody's enthusiasm. Take your time. Verses 24-25, the difficulty in looking at men's sins and good works. It's easy to see that struggles and sins some have. But with some others, the sins are hidden. We all have areas in our lives that God is dealing with. Me more than most, I think. And sometimes the area is something clearly evident to others. But sometimes the sinful area, it's not that evident. Some people are regarded as holy just because they're good at hiding their sin. Don't we know it? Good works are always eventually revealed. Good works are always eventually revealed, but sins are sometimes hidden and will be evident only at judgment. That's a scary thought, isn't it? We could be confused that somebody is holy when they're sinners. How do we find out? Because if you only see somebody once a week, you don't know what they get up to. You don't know what people get up to behind closed doors. You don't know what people get up to when you're not around. I actually say that's not our problem. We leave that to God to sort out. We can only judge people. And we are allowed to judge people. People go, you can't judge me, only God can judge me. Actually, no, if you're a believer, you are allowed to make a judgment call. We can only make a view on people on what we see, what we know. Don't try to make any other judgment based on anything you hear. Only on what you see and what you know. We cannot make a judgment as to whether somebody's going to go into the kingdom. Nobody goes around with a big magic S on their head saying saved or you for unsaved. But we can judge people by their actions, the way they talk, their deeds and their words. So how do we apply pastoral duties? 5 items. Respectful leadership. Pastors are encouraged to treat older men as fathers, that's those who are older than me, and younger men as brothers, fostering a family-like dynamic within the church. Similarly, older women should be treated as mothers and younger women as sisters with purity and integrity. In essence, the church is a family. We are brothers and sisters in the real sense of the word. In fact, in the only sense of the word, we are brothers and sisters. If you're a member of this church, we are brothers and sisters. And we treat each other. We may well fall out. We may well argue. All families fall out and argue. There's nothing new there. But at the end of the day, we are family. And we care for each other. And we do the one most important thing that all families should do. We pray for each other. We look out for each other. Care for widows. Now I'm going to change the word for widows here to care for those who are by themselves. Keeping an eye on folk. The passage emphasises the responsibility of the church to support widows who are truly in need, while encouraging those with families to seek support from relatives. The principle reinforces the church's role in social care and responsibility. I think that just speaks for itself. Change the word widow for anybody who is by themselves, anybody who lives alone. It is the responsibility to just keep an eye on people, and if they don't turn up for a while, you start. It's like when people don't come to church for a week. What I love about you guys is that you all say to me, Ian, I can't come X date, or I can't come Y date. Barry gave me his holiday slip for the end of the month. Little Ian and Sue gave me when they're going to be back. People tell me when they're not here. But if you don't come for a while, and I don't know why, I'll start ringing up and asking other people. Because I know some of you talk outside the church and I don't know what those are about. But I check up on you. I keep a finger on the pulse. I try to anyway. Especially for those, it's something we're meant to do. There's an accountability in leadership. Paul warns against hastily appointing church elders. Well, we don't really have church elders here. Stressing the importance of vetting candidates thoroughly to avoid complicity in their potential shortcomings. Basically, what we're saying here is that Barry and I, who are probably the only 2 leaders rarely here, are responsible to you guys. And you guys keep Barry and I to account. Church discipline. Only ever had to do this once. Pastors are instructed to rebuke openly those who persist in sin, ensuring the church members understand the consequences of wrongdoing, and this approach helps maintain the integrity and holiness of the church community. If I find anybody doing stuff that I don't think should be doing stuff, and stuff is stuff that you shouldn't be doing as a Christian, I will be having words. And I've done that to a couple of you, in my time. Not issued church discipline, but it is part of my job to try and keep you on the straight and narrow. Most of you, it doesn't happen. It's once in a blue moon. And the same goes for me. If you see me doing something I shouldn't do, then you need to hold me to account as well. And lastly, and I suppose I've just covered that one, personal integrity. Paul advises Timothy to keep himself pure, including in matters of personal health and conduct. That's a bit about taking little wine with the water. Basically, it seems that Timothy may have had problems with his stomach and regular illnesses. and the wine would have been better than the water because all the germs in the water would have been killed off by the process of making the wine. It doesn't allow you to go out and go drinking a bottle every night or whatever, thinking you're well, you see. So, it's a little wine, not a big case of wine. And it reminded that pastors must lead by example. This is true, How does it look if I come in here and I'm stoned out of my skull? Or I stand here and use obscenities? Or I have a troop of dancing girls follow me through? It doesn't look good, does it? And I'm the pastor of the church. I mean, if I can do that type of stuff, then what's to stop you doing that type of stuff? I could imagine Danielle with a troop of dancing girls following her through. But no, it's a case of going, it's not, you guys live your lives. I'm constantly on display to people. People know what I do. I sign letters, Pastor, Bootle Protestant Free Church. I've written a document that Scott's got a copy of for the Loyal Orders. It's signed as Bootle Protestant, Pastor Bootle Protestant Free Church. That means people are watching me constantly. They're waiting for me to trip up. And I tell you, when I trip, I do it really well. I can do, I would get a 6.6 off the 10 judges for the way I trip. And it's up to you to go, Ian, you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have probably said that. Now, there may be times when I have to say something that's harsh because it's of necessity. But my personal life really has to be, as far as I can tell, well, as far as I know, as tight as possible, a Christian life. It has to consist of prayer. It has to consist of Bible study. I have to be generous. I have to be kind. I have to try and keep my tongue under control because the tongue is the worst weapon. And then there are times I just let go. And sometimes I just need to do that. So, care for the church. Care for those who have no one. If you have family, if you have friends, if you have relatives, you go to them. The church is the last resort because the church has a limited resource. But don't ever think that the church will not step in if it has to and it has the ability to. You are never totally alone if you're a member of God's family, beg pardon. And in this church, you are all members of God's family. Amen.